Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for our Cultivating Tribal Food Sovereignty webinar. And today we will be talking about 638 authority opportunities for tribal food and agriculture. We really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to join us. I know that everyone's, especially at this point in time, are getting some webinar and Zoom fatigue, but we appreciate you being here and we're looking forward to sharing out some of this information with you. Just to go over some quick housekeeping for today's webinar. If you have a question, please feel free to submit via the question box. We'll have members of our team here monitoring that so we can help answer as Aaron joins and does the presentation. If you have any audio issues, also feel free to, actually I recommend logging out and logging back in using the link that was sent to your email address. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over just for a quick overview about cultivating tribal food sovereignty to Carly Hotvet.
Thanks, Whitney. My name's Carly Hotvet, and I'm the Director of Tribal Enterprise here at the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. With the work that we've been doing in policy development regarding agriculture and food systems in Indian country, it became apparent there was a need to encourage and support tribes to get into the driver's seat when it came to tribal sovereignty and food systems in Indian country. Our Cultivating Tribal Food Sovereignty is a call to action for tribes, tribal organizations, and individual producers to maximize opportunities for food systems development. What we hope to encourage is the creation of departments of tribal agriculture, expansion of food systems networks and infrastructure, and really encourage tribes to be thinking about what opportunities are available to maximize their assets and the services they're able to provide when it comes to food systems. This series is intended to provide information for decision makers, employees, stakeholders, tribal citizens, and other people interested in cultivating tribal food sovereignty to provide this information about decision making and help put together a plan on how your tribe or how your organization can support tribal food sovereignty.
Great, thank you, Carly. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Aaron Parker.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you, Carly, for setting up the webinar. I really appreciate that. And thanks to everybody for joining us this afternoon to talk a little bit about cultivating tribal food sovereignty through some 638 opportunities that came out of the 2018 Farm Bill. Specifically today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 638 opportunity in the 2018 Farm Bill for FDIPR, the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations. So I want to go to the next slide. I will jump in with a little intro about us here at IFAI and what I do for anybody who might not be super familiar with our work. Since we're going to spend a lot of time talking about 638 today, I'm going to do a really quick, very high level summary of what 638 authority is just generally. And then we're going to talk, and I'll talk a little bit about what FDIPR is just generally, and then we're going to marry those two things and talk about what 638 for FDIPR is, some of the opportunities that we see to be able to cultivate tribal food sovereignty by taking advantage of this opportunity that was in the 2018 Farm Bill. Finish up with some next steps and talk a little bit about how IFAI can be a resource to help you in this process of cultivating tribal food sovereignty, not only for this opportunity, but for other opportunities too. So if we want to jump to the next slide, talk a little bit about IFAI. If you're not familiar with us, we were founded as part of the University of Arkansas School of Law in 2013 by then Dean, now Vice Chancellor Stacy Leeds, and our founding director, Janie Sims-Hipp. We moved with Stacy to the Office of Economic Development at the University of Arkansas back in July 2018. And really what we like to say that we do, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, through all of the work that we do, we try to put the tribal sovereignty and food sovereignty, and we do that through strategic legal analysis, policy analysis, development of educational resources, this webinar series that Carly set up so nicely about cultivating tribal food sovereignty through policy work at the tribal level, and just using all of those tools in the legal and policy realm that we can to try to further food sovereignty and agriculture and economic development all across Indian country. So, next slide. So we'll set up today's discussion talking a little bit about 638 authority. So you're hopefully familiar with 638 authority just broadly, but if you are new to 638 authority, generally a very brief overview. It's usually talked about as like tribal self-governance or self-determination authority. It comes from the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act of 1975, which is called Public Law number 93-638. So 638 is the number of the law, and that's just kind of where that term comes from. If you hear 638 authority, it's referring to this 1975 law that acknowledged tribal sovereignty and really acknowledged the unique role that tribal governments play as governments, actually, to do what they've always done and govern for their people, and specifically be able to take over federal programs and run them in a way that makes sense to the tribal community, but have funding flow from the federal government to the tribe to be able to do those things. You'll hear people talk a lot in the context of 638 authority about tribes administering programs, services, functions, and activities. Those are things that are carved out in the law in the Indian Self-Determination Act that tribes are able to take over from federal programs and obtain funding to carry out those programs. You'll hear it called 638 Contracting or Compacting Authority. It's a self-determination contract or self-governance authority. There's two different kind of ways that you can go at this under 638. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that today. That's just a really, really high-level overview. Just the big takeaway here for what we're going to talk about today in the FDIPR context is that the Farm Bill created self-determination contracting authority. So that's kind of the box that we're in. If you're uniquely familiar with 638, as many folks in Indian country are, when we talk about 638 for FDIPR, what's in the Farm Bill is the self-determination contracting authority. So that's what the Farm Bill set up. I want to go to the next slide. A little bit more about 638. 638 is not an opportunity that all tribal nations take advantage of because it started in 1975 to allow tribal nations to take over functions in basically education and healthcare realms. You see a lot of Indian Health Service budget being tribally administered through 638. You see a lot of the Department of Interior's budget tribally administered through 638, but about 67% of the 574 federally recognized tribes have some kind of 638 agreement. So the majority, but not 100%. The reasons that 638 has been, I think, a really innovative solution and promoting tribal sovereignty and marrying that with federal policy is that it enhances tribal self-determination by recognizing the tribe as the sovereign. The tribe is the sovereign nation that is in the best position to make decisions about how programs need to roll out in their community because they are the government in that community. So it's about recognizing tribal sovereignty, recognizing that tribes have the unique and intimate knowledge and understanding of their communities and have since time immemorial. And so they are really in the best position to run programs. And what that does through direct streamlined funding from the federal government to tribal nations to contract for programs reduces administrative burdens for both federal and tribal governments, and also ensures that programs are delivered in a way that actually makes sense to citizens of that tribal community. So that's a little bit of an overview about 638. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll do a little bit of an overview about FDIPR, and then we're going to put these two things together and talk about how that can help cultivate tribal sovereignty. So if you're not familiar with the food distribution program on Indian reservations, it's a federal nutrition assistance program. It provides food packages monthly to about 90,000 people each month all across Indian country. It's administered on the ground by 112 Indian tribal organizations, a couple of state agencies, and those food packages are used by citizens of over 276 different tribes. So it's a pretty significant part of the food security safety network in Indian country. The program's been around since 1977, but it has changed a lot since 1977. The food packages, in addition to containing shelf-stable foods, now contain frozen foods, and since 2010, the FDIPR food package also has fresh fruits and vegetables that have been a regular part of the package since 2010 through a program that's a partnership between USDA USDA, ITOs, and the Department of Defense Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. There's also a shell egg pilot program that's been going on over the last couple of years to get shell eggs instead of powdered eggs into the FDIPR food package. So it's another change that's come to the food package. And there's also traditional foods finally available in the food package. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that all of those changes that have come to the food package have come because of tireless advocacy on the part of tribal leaders and FDIPR program staff and program managers who manage FDIPR every single day at ITOs across Indian country, talking to members of Congress, talking to policymakers, talking to regulators, stressing the importance of access to fresh fruits and vegetables for people who are utilizing FDIPR every single month, stressing the importance, not only physical, but also spiritual and cultural importance of traditional foods being available to people through the FDIPR food package. So today, in the FDIPR food package, there's bison, wild rice, salmon, blue cornmeal, catfish, and lamb. All those are the traditional foods that are currently represented by the food package. So it's, again, a pretty significant part of the food security safety network for Indian country. And has continued to be so, as we have seen during this pandemic crisis, when people are really looking to their tribal governments as people are out of work because of social distancing policies and other things that have kept people from being able to go about living in the way that we were accustomed to before March. So people are really using the program more significantly. There's, I think, a 14% increase in FDIPR since the pandemic began. So this has and continues to be a pretty significant program for food assistance in Indian country. And that is why in the 2018 Farm Bill, there were some really significant changes that were made to this program that provide some opportunities for more tribal self-governance in the program. So if we want to go to the next slide, we can start putting these two things together. Just to give you an example, I know I talked about the fresh fruits and vegetables that are available through FDIPR. There are some that are available year round. This is the full list. I'm not going to read every single one of these things. I just wanted folks to know, because what we're going to be talking about today is a 638 opportunity that enables tribal governments to take over food sourcing for FDIPR. So what I think an important thing to know up top is some of the things that are available in the food package right now. So these are some of the fresh fruits and vegetables that are available. There's year-round fruits, year-round vegetables, and then there are things that come in and out of the package and are available seasonally. So these are some of the things that are available. And then we've also got a slide next on traditional foods. So you can see some of the traditional foods that are available, and some are available. I need to edit this and add lamb and mutton, because that is the newest food that's come in, where the FDIPR food package review working group is constantly looking at additional foods to be able to add to this. So this is not going to be the end of traditional foods being put into FDIPR. It's a continual process of looking at what can be sourced next. So stay tuned for more, but for now, this is what's in the program. And the reason that all of this 638 opportunity actually came about from some recommendations from the Native Farm Bill Coalition, from tribal leaders who are participating in the Native Farm Bill Coalition, as well as a standing group of tribal leaders who've been consulting with USDA on FDIPR since the last several years. And the recommendations from the Native Farm Bill Coalition were to put 638 in for FDIPR because it would promote tribal sovereignty, it would expand self-governance in this critical area, and it would also provide some economic development opportunities if tribes were able to actually directly do the sourcing for these food products that go into the food packages, because tribal governments could be sourcing from local producers, from tribal producers, being able to include more traditional foods into the food package. So all of those things were part of the Native Farm Bill Coalition's recommendations. And if you're not familiar with the Native Farm Bill Coalition, I didn't put a lot of slides in on that, but I will give you a really quick summary. By the end of by the time the Farm Bill was signed in 2018, there were over 170 different member tribal nations to the Native Farm Bill Coalition. It was a really broad coalition of tribal nations coming together to look at opportunities to advance tribal sovereignty in food and agriculture through federal policy, and specifically the 2018 Farm Bill. And that resulted in 63 tribal specific provisions being included in the 2018 Farm Bill, which was the most that had ever been included in any Farm Bill that were tribal specific. Those recommendations came directly from Indian country, and this 638 opportunity that we're talking about in FDIPR today is one of those. I want to go to the next slide. Then We'll talk about what that opportunity looks like. So the 2018 Farm Bill, for the very first time, extended that 638 authority to the FDIPR program for food procurement. What this provision does is enable tribal nations or ITOs to enter into self-determination contracts to actually procure those foods that we're talking about for the FDIPR packages. It's not for the whole package, probably. This is a demonstration project, so that's how Congress likes to do things. They'll put a demonstration project in, so that's what the Farm Bill authorized, was a demo project for 638 self-determination contracts for this. And really, this is an opportunity, again, to promote tribal sovereignty through food, to help support local tribal producers of foods, whether that's fresh fruits and vegetables, whether it's traditional food products. And I will say too, I'm going to talk a lot about sourcing fresh fruits and vegetables and sourcing traditional food products through this opportunity, but that's not what this opportunity is limited to. The Farm Bill gives some really basic guidance on what these foods should look like, and we'll go over that in a few slides. The reason that I talk a lot about fresh fruits and vegetables and traditional food products being sourced through this is because after several years of working with the National Association of Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations Board, as well as tribal leaders who've been sitting in consultation with USDA on FDIPR, and farmers and ranchers all over Indian country, like fresh fruits and vegetables and traditional foods are the things that we hear most commonly as the foods that people want to be included in this food package. So there's canned and shelf stable and frozen food products that are in the FDIPR food package right now that could also be procured by tribal governments under the 638 authority. There's nothing in the Farm Bill that would prohibit that. But I'm going to talk about fresh fruits and vegetables and traditional foods a lot, just because those have been really the priority items that have been identified in consultation with USDA by tribal leaders and by FDIPR program managers and board members. But just know, if you're thinking about taking advantage of this opportunity and you wanted to try to source a different food item, you're not limited to sourcing fresh fruits and vegetables or traditional foods. It could be something else that you want to source. I'm just going to use those as examples most commonly. This opportunity does actually have money attached to it, which was really exciting. It didn't come in the Farm Bill. It had to come through a separate appropriations process, but Congress did appropriate $3 million for this demo project, and that's available until September 30th of 2021. This is the big thing. USDA is still working on opening the application process for this. Yes, the Farm Bill was passed in December 2018. We got funding in an appropriations bill in 2019, and we're still waiting on USDA to open up the application process for this. So if you think that you're behind, don't worry, you're not. You have not missed an application deadline. You haven't missed an application opportunity for this because it's just not open yet. And we're going to talk about hopefully how we get there and some things that tribal nations can be doing to strategize about how to take advantage of this opportunity so that when USDA does open the door, everybody's ready to go. And that's largely what I'm going to talk about today, but just know you are not behind. If you feel like you're behind, you're not, because the application process is not open yet. So next slide. So a lot of the reasons that tribal leaders had identified to look at FDIPR 638 food sourcing, like the reasons that this was a priority item from the Native Farm Bill Coalition was that really what it was aiming to do was promote two things: economic development and food sovereignty. To look at 638 as an opportunity to develop more market access for tribally grown and tribally produced foods through both the federal commodity procurement market, not just for FDIPR, but more broadly, and also to use that to leverage more opportunities to grow and expand in additional markets. So that if producers knew that they had a guaranteed market through this FDIPR food sourcing, then they might be able to use that as leverage to grow and expand their operation, expand their farm, to expand into additional markets and take advantage of additional market opportunities as well. Because there are so many tribal nations that are represented in the FDIPR food package pool, we also saw this as an opportunity for the potential for some intertribal cooperatives to maybe spring up and grow further markets across Indian country to share and do food sourcing across tribes with this opportunity. I think we're a little bit far from that because we're still in the demo project stage of this, but ultimately I think the goal in talking about getting this 638 authority actually into the Farm Bill as a demonstration project was to show that tribal nations have always been feeding their people and can continue to do so, and hopefully then provide some leverage to broaden this opportunity in future farm bills. And really expand on it and allow tribes to do the whole food package instead of just, you know, 1 or 2 foods as this opportunity would provide. But really the deep fundamental part of it is promoting food sovereignty, that to have the tribe, not the federal government, be determining what foods should be going into the FDIPR food package. So like to look at what's most culturally appropriate in terms of a traditional food, for example. That's been one of the recommendations from tribal leaders, looking at ways to change FDIPR and make it fit a little bit better for Indian country for several years, is not only expanding access to locally and tribally grown foods, but to really include traditional foods in a way that makes sense, because we know traditional foods are specific to a tribe or they're specific within a region. And so while it's amazing to have ground bison, to have salmon and wild rice and other traditional foods included in the FDIPR food package, we know that those aren't traditional foods for every single person in Indian country. Those are really culturally specific. And so one of the things that this opportunity can also do, hopefully, is enable a tribe that wants to participate in 638 to source foods that are that culturally specific food for that tribe, instead of having, you know, delicious food that is in the food package that's still just not as culturally relevant, to be able to swap that out with something that is grown locally or raised locally, harvested locally, and is actually also that that traditional food for that particular community. Next slide. So before we get to some of the strategies that I think tribes can be thinking about right now to get ready to take advantage of this opportunity when USDA does eventually open the door for it, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the process has looked like and where we are right now. So this is a really high level overview, and then I'm going to go into a lot more detail on the next couple of slides. But the 2018 Farm Bill is what authorized this particular opportunity. It's section 4003B of the 2018 Farm Bill. If you're a super nerd like me and you wanted the citation, that is the authorizing language for this self-determination contract demonstration project at USDA for FDIPR. The Farm Bill also set some very basic minimal guidelines for the foods that are sourced under this program, and I will go over those in detail in just a minute as well. So that's what the Farm Bill did. Farm Bill opened the door. The next piece was getting some money in the appropriations process to actually be able to do this and run this program. In 2019, Congress did appropriate $3 million for this demonstration project, and that money, again, is available until September 30th of 2021. And while that does seem like it's a long time away, I think we all know that federal processes go very slowly. So we're hoping to see some significant movement out of USDA pretty soon on this, because here we are in June 2020, and we know that, you know, in a couple of months it's going to be September 2020 and we'll be a year out. So we want to make sure that USDA is getting that process ready and opening it up. But that is where we are right now. We're parked at USDA, waiting on them to establish a process and open up a process so that tribes can apply and then start sourcing food for FDIPR through the 638 opportunity. Next slide. So some things that probably want to know a little bit, because since we don't have a lot of clarity from USDA, we don't know what USDA is really going to do in terms of what the application itself is going to look like to take advantage of this opportunity. We don't know what paperwork USDA may be asking tribes to provide to apply for this opportunity. A lot of those things are very unknown. There have been some consultations on it that USDA has done, and a little bit later I have some recommendations to share with you that tribal leaders have made in consultation about what this process should look like. But for now, what we know for sure, what I can definitely tell you, is that the Farm Bill has some very minimal requirements for what the foods procured under this program need to look like. Again, section 4003B, for the nerds in the room, is the section that you want to be looking at in the Farm Bill if you want to look at these provisions for yourself. But there are basically three things that the Farm Bill says that foods procured under the 638 opportunity by tribal nations need to be. The food has to be domestically produced. It has to supplant and not supplement an existing food package item or items. And the food has to be of similar or higher nutritional value to the food item it replaces. And that's it. That's all the Farm Bill says. So it's just pretty simple and pretty basic, to be honest. It's not a very long list of things that Congress felt was important to include as requirements for this. The other thing the Farm Bill did, however, was give the Secretary of Agriculture the authority to establish some additional criteria. We don't know if USDA is going to establish that additional criteria. One of the recommendations that tribal leaders have made is that they do not do that, and that they go with these minimal requirements. Like, you know, Congress keep it simple, and it is pretty simple. So let's not like make it any more complicated or burdensome. The idea of 638 is that it's supposed to reduce the administrative burden for USDA. So keep it simple was kind of the recommendation that tribal leaders have made to USDA about this process. But again, we're still waiting to see what USDA will do and if they'll take that advice or not. This is what we know for sure. So if you're thinking about taking advantage of this opportunity, these are the things that you definitely need to know, that we know you need to know right now. As you're looking around your community and looking at your food system and thinking about what you want to see in the FDIPR food package, if you're going to take advantage of this opportunity, just know you're looking for food that is domestically produced. And then you need to identify some kind of item within the existing FDIPR food package, and you take that item out and you put the item that you want in there. And then that food also has to be of similar or higher nutritional value to whatever item you took out. And that's it. That's all we know. And we also know, of course, that there's $3 million available for this project that Congress appropriated in 2019, and we've got until September 30th of 2021 for USDA to spend that money and get those funds out to tribal nations so that they can take advantage of this process. Next slide. So this is where we are right now. USDA has heard from tribal leaders in consultation on this several times. The tribal leader working group that meets in consultation with FDIPR 3 times a year has lifted up some specific recommendations really since December 2018 when this was actually passed in the Farm Bill. So USDA has heard from tribal leaders through that group and from the National Association of Food Distributions on Indian Reservations Board. They've made some recommendations as well as to what that should look like. So USDA has heard a lot, I think, from Indian country, and a lot of the requests have been very similar. But there's always an opportunity to continue to tell USDA how you think this program should work. In December 2019, USDA opened a request for information and basically just like took comments for 30 days with some very specific questions about how this should roll out, what priorities they should have, what kind of process they should use. I think there were about 20 tribes that wrote in and responded to that request for information to talk about the 638 process and how they thought that it should work. But again, there's currently no open 638 process to apply to USDA for the funds, and the timeline for that process is still a little bit unclear. I know that USDA has returned to working on this. We've been on calls with them here throughout this pandemic crisis, off and on, just to check in about FDIPR and how things are going. And I know FNS staff at USDA has mentioned that they are working on this and trying to develop this process and open it up. And they have scheduled a tribal consultation as of yesterday on this. So I think next slide has that info, I hope. Yeah, it does. I was wrong. There is a tribal consultation on July 15th though, and I've got the information and call information here in a later slide so you know what that is. But just so you also know, some of the recommendations that tribal leaders have made to USDA about how this 638 opportunity should roll out. This is a non-exhaustive list. These are just some of the top line items, but tribal leaders have asked USDA to fund as many applications as possible under this, recognizing that $3 million is not going to be able to extend to everyone. Since this is a demonstration project, the Farm Bill says one or more tribes can participate in this demonstration project. So the Farm Bill opens the door for more than one tribe to participate in this. And that's been some of the recommendations from tribal leaders, is to look at that Farm Bill language as like funding as many applications as possible, recognizing that you only have $3 million. Tribal leaders have also asked that USDA diversify their funded projects in terms of funding tribes that maybe want to source one or more foods for the package, tribes that only want to source one food through this demonstration project for the package, to try to also diversify funded projects in terms of the size of the FDIPR program that's being served. Every program is different. Every program has a different number of participants. So tribal leaders have recommended to USDA that USDA fund some larger FDIPR sites for this, to fund some smaller FDIPR sites for this in terms of the number of people that they serve, just so they can see how this works in every situation. And that hopefully with an eye to, if Congress decides in a future Farm Bill to expand the 638 opportunity, and there's an opportunity for everyone to be involved in it, because it would no longer be a demonstration project, that all of the kinks basically in the system would be worked out, because people, there have been that diversity of funded projects to be able to see how this works for FDIPR sites of all different sizes in terms of number of participation. Tribal leaders have also recommended extreme transparency in the funding process for this to make sure that everybody is on the same page and understands how USDA's decision-making process is working. Tribal leaders have recommended, again, I think I mentioned this before, but no additional criteria beyond those 3 things that are in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill says foods have to be domestically produced, supplant, not supplement, and be of similar or higher nutritional value. And tribal leaders have recommended that USDA not take advantage of the secretarial authority to add more, but just to go with those criteria for this demonstration project. Tribal leaders have also recommended that USDA prioritize funding 638 procurement opportunities that are prioritizing traditional foods and fresh fruits and vegetable sourcing. Those are items that have been priorities for tribal leaders to be included more and more in the FDIPR food package over the last several years of consultation for sure, but really going all the way back to 1977 when this program was created. There's been a consistent effort from tribal leaders to improve the quality and consistency of food items that are included in the FDIPR food package, specifically around the need for fresh fruits and vegetables and more traditional foods. So that's been an item that tribal leaders have identified as a priority to USDA. And finally, I saved the really crunchy, the really like wonky legal one for last. Tribal leaders have recommended that USDA understand that there are 2 contracts basically in this situation, and that there's a self-determination contract that a tribe would have with USDA to be able to do this opportunity and to get the federal funding, and then have the tribe do the procurement. And then on the tribal side, there's a contract between the tribe and whatever vendor is providing that food to the tribe for that program. And the recommendation from tribal leaders is that like USDA needs to understand that USDA doesn't really have a lot to say when it comes to the terms of the contract between the tribe and the vendor. So there shouldn't be an overly burdensome requirement, for example, that the tribal vendors have to go through the USDA vendor certification process that you have to go through right now if you want to take advantage of any kind of bid that Agricultural Marketing Service at USDA puts out for foods right now. The recommendation from tribal leaders is that like USDA should stay out of that, that these should be very simple contracts between the tribe and USDA, and then all of those things about procurement and packaging and food safety and vendor certification, all of that needs to be done at the tribal level so that the tribe can tailor that to what's best for that community and what works best for that food. So that's been, I think, probably the most significant one, because we know that I think if vendors do have to go through that vendor certification process with USDA to be able to take advantage of this opportunity. That's a lot. It's a very paperwork intensive process. It can be a very long process. And there just aren't a lot of tribal suppliers that are already in that process right now. It's been one of the barriers to getting more tribally produced food into this food package right now anyway, just because that process is so complicated. And even with some of the small business exemptions to that process, it's still pretty complicated, and it is also can be a very costly process for a small business to go through. So that for those reasons, tribal leaders have really recommended that USDA not do any of that, and just acknowledge that tribal sovereignty is really underpinning this whole opportunity anyway, so that tribes really need to be in the driver's seat on this. Next slide. So here's where I thought my other slide was. I'm sorry about that. This is all of this info, and I've got this slide in here twice just because I thought it was really, really important to highlight. There is a consultation that has been scheduled as of yesterday for FDIPR 638. USDA is making some movement on this opportunity. Again, they want to hear from tribal leaders and have a discussion about FDIPR 638. I'm not really sure what I don't know if they're going to announce an open process at that time or if they're still looking for more feedback, but I know this is going to be a pretty crucial thing to take advantage of and be a part of if you're interested at all in taking advantage of this opportunity. So that is scheduled for July 15th, which is just a little less than a month from now. It'll be a phone conversation since traveling is not really an option for most of us right now. So that's from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern time on July 15th. The participant conference line and passcode are here on the screen. If you can please share this widely with tribal leaders, with people in your community. Since this is a consultation, I don't have information on proxies yet, but I would imagine that Office of Tribal Relations at USDA will have some proxy info. So if you have a tribal leader who's not able to attend, but they want to designate a proxy, that's a thing that you can do for this consultation as well. I know if you're listening to this, hopefully you're already on our email list, but I'm sure we'll be sharing more information about this as we have it, if there's an agenda, or just sharing the call-in information or any kind of educational materials and briefing documents to help tribal leaders prepare for this consultation. Please keep an eye on our email list, because we'll try to be sending those out closer to this consultation, just so folks have those available. But this is going to be a pretty important phone call, I think, to be a part of if you want to take advantage of the 638 opportunity, if you're interested in it. So please join this if you can, and please share this very widely, because the more voices that USDA is able to hear from tribal leadership on this and have that government-to-government consultation about how this is going to roll out, the better. So with that, next slide. Yeah, so that's not the only thing that you can do. Attending the consultation is not the only thing you can do if you want to take advantage of this opportunity. You can do some strategizing and planning right now. Just because the 638 contracting process isn't open yet with USDA, that actually means it's a really great time to be doing a lot of planning and doing a lot of strategizing. And this is a non-exhaustive list of some questions I think that are probably going to be important to think through. And that can kind of get you started in that planning process. So first of all, just looking at what food might be available to you for sourcing. And there's a lot of different data sources that you could look at on that. If you've done a community food sovereignty assessment anytime recently, if you look through your National Census of Agriculture data, just to see what your farmers are growing, what your ranchers are raising, what your fishermen are catching, like what are those foods that you have that are available to you. And part of that may be a little bit of priority setting too, in terms of like what you like. Do you want to source just locally generally? Do you want to source only from tribal producers? Like what's your thought process on that? So just right at the gate, looking at the landscape of your food system and what foods are available to you is a really good thing to be doing right now, because that's going to help you figure out if you do want to apply for this opportunity, if your producers can support the volume that you need to source to be able to do this is another consideration to be made. And as part of that planning process, I think that probably your best subject matter expert and your best resource for tribal leaders on this, or for folks who work for Tribal Department of Agriculture or whatever entity within the tribal governance structure is going to manage this and do this 638 contracting, is bring in your FDIPR program managers. Those are your subject matter experts. They know your community. They know the foods that your community members like to take. If they're utilizing FDIPR right now, they can give you some really detailed information about your community's food preferences. And so that way, like if there's a food item in the food package that may be less popular with your community, that may be a good one that you want to pick as the food that you're going to replace. But that information is really hyper local. It's very specific to every single one of the FDIPR sites that's out there. So working with those FDIPR program managers, if this is an opportunity you want to take advantage of, is going to be really, really important, listening to them and their voices and knowing what your community members kind of want is, I think, probably going to be a really important step in this process in developing your application and your strategy for taking advantage of this 638 opportunity. And that'll also help you develop the priority foods that you want to source between those two things, looking at what's being grown where you are, and also what your community is really asking for. Those two things can help you develop kind of a priority list, whether you want to source traditional foods, do you want to focus on fresh fruits and vegetables, do you want to focus on a different food, something that's canned or shelf stable or processed. Those things are available as well. The Farm Bill doesn't say that you can't source those things. Again, traditional foods and fresh fruits and vegetables are just some of the priority items that we've heard. But developing that priority list is going to be important as well as part of this strategy. And then working with your FDIPR managers, you can maybe figure out what's in the current food package right now that's a good candidate to be replaced with the foods that you want to source, that you know that you can source. From there, you may look at your current procurement policies that might apply, but within your tribal governance structure. If I know one of the concerns that we've heard from tribal leaders and FDIPR program managers since this policy or since this opportunity came up in the 2018 Farm Bill is that there may not be very many potential vendors. There may not be many potential farmers that could provide enough of a volume to be able to source for this. So if you need to do any kind of sole source justifications or anything like that, knowing what that is and having that planned for right now is a great time to do that, just so you know and you're not surprised by any kind of paperwork that you may need to do internally in applying for this opportunity and making sure that it's successful. You may also want to think about what entity within your tribal governance structure is going to manage this, and if there are any additional authorities that you want to help establish right now so that it can run and be successful. And here I'm kind of thinking of the Tribal Department of Agriculture. As Carly mentioned at the beginning, a lot of this cultivating tribal food sovereignty work that we're doing right now is really focusing on how tribal governance structures like developing Department of Agriculture within the tribal governance structure can cultivate that food sovereignty and establish that foundation for food sovereignty as a matter of tribal law and policy so that it's there long term for the whole tribal community. So if there's an opportunity to use this to leverage the development of one of those entities, just as kind of a holistic planning strategy, that may be something that you want to think about as well. Like, what entity is going to do this and run this and work with our farmers or work with our ranchers who are going to be our vendors for this. And if there are any qualifications or priorities that you have for vendors, priority setting and strategizing around that is a great idea right now as well. Particularly thinking here about like food safety certifications or the volume of food that you want to source, or even the way that you would want that food to be packaged when the vendor delivers it to your FDIPR site. And that's another good thing to really work with your FDIPR program manager on, because every single FDIPR site has a different folks who are using the program. There are single households, there are households of whole families, and those households need different things when it comes to the way that food is packaged. So if I'm a single person using FDIPR, then I may want a smaller package, like a 3-pound bag of apples, for example. But if I'm a whole family, I may want a 10-pound bag of apples. And every FDIPR site has a different demographic profile when it comes to the households that are using the program. So you, I think, have an opportunity to really tailor this specifically to your households by working directly with your FDIPR program manager and learning a little bit about your household trends, not just the foods that your FDIPR households are really gravitating towards, but also the food packaging sizes and the kinds of food packaging that really work for those households as well. So those are some things that you can also be thinking about right now as you kind of think about getting ready for this opportunity as we roll forward to that consultation in July. And next slide. Obviously, the consultation is also a really important next step that you can take participating in this consultation. I know that I've talked a lot about this consultation, but I just really want folks to be able to know that it's happening, because I know there's so much going on, especially for tribal leaders right now. So much is happening that you need to address to help your communities through this crisis. But if you are interested in participating in the 638 program and you do have a little bit of time on July 15th or can designate a proxy, please try to join or designate that proxy so that your voice is heard in this process. USDA really needs to hear from you, I think, to really make sure, especially like the urgency of getting this started right now. As we've seen, I mean, Carly said on our last webinar about this, like, crises like this pandemic don't break systems, they just reveal what was already broken within the system. And one of the things that I think people in Indian country have known for a long time has been broken is the food security safety network. So any opportunity through policy like this that can help fix that and do it in a way that centers tribal governance and centers tribal sovereignty is so important, not only right now, but to fixing those broken pieces of a system so that they aren't broken in the future, so that if there's a next crisis, Indian country's prepared and has that safety net built in a way that makes sense for every single tribal community, which is going to look different for every tribe. So this is a really important opportunity to let USDA know that this is really urgent, that if whatever priorities you have for it, you can bring those to this consultation and let USDA know what your thoughts are. So and have that dialogue in that government to government way with USDA to make sure this gets rolled out in a good way. So please attend if you can. That's the other important next step, along with all of the planning and strategizing, just hopefully being able to jump on that consultation call and share those thoughts with USDA is a really good next step. Next slide. And we can help with some of that too. We can help with information prior to the consultation. If you want to know all the whole background of the 638 opportunity for FDIPR, if you want more information about that, about the recommendations that tribal leaders have already made, and you want to look over any of that, our team can provide that support and education and development of materials to help you do that. We can also be a part of your planning process. If you're sitting down and you're trying to think about how you would take advantage of this opportunity and you want to make a plan and develop those priority lists for foods and goals that I talked about, our team can help with that as well. So those are just a couple things that we can do. We can also help with tribal code development. So if as part of this you're thinking of creating a tribal Department of Agriculture or a similar entity like that to house all of your food sovereignty efforts within your tribal governance, we can help with that as well. Next slide. It's this one example of something that we have that can help, and our attorneys on our staff can help with, is our Model Tribal Food and Agriculture Code. There's codes in here on establishing a Department of Agriculture for your tribal nation. There's code templates in here to help protect traditional foods and seeds and promote health and nutrition within tribal jurisdiction. So there's a lot of different pieces of this that could be useful to you as you're thinking about taking advantage of the 638 opportunity. There's also some food safety things in here that might be of interest if you're thinking about what food safety certifications you might want to encourage your vendors for this program to have. We have some model templates and codes on that as part of this process, and all of that's a free resource to tribal nations. It's all available on tribalfoodcode.com. It's our standalone website for the food code. You can see the whole thing there. It's free to make an account, super easy to do, and we would also be happy and available to work with you or talk you through the implementation process of that and what it looks like to kind of customize these pieces to your specific jurisdiction. Next slide. Talked a lot about tribal departments of agriculture, so I borrowed some slides from Carly just to show you a little bit about how different organizational structures might look, because I know that's something that we've had some questions on before. 638 self-determination opportunities can definitely be a part of the house within your tribal government structure where food sovereignty work lives. So next slide. If you're interested in thinking through what that structure might look like, Carly and our team put together some really cool visual representations. If you want to go to the next slide, I think maybe they're on the next slide. Yeah, there they are. There's just a couple of different org charts that she put together that really show that there's a lot of different ways to do a Department of Agriculture, a lot of different things that it can do. But you can see under this particular example that there's a food and nutrition section of this Department of Agriculture that would have like FDIPR as an example. So that might be a place this could live within your governance structure. Next slide. Here, it's a different way of looking at it, a different way of having a tribal Department of Agriculture. Here it goes through Division of Ag and Natural Resources instead, but the whole thing, like there's still all of those different subject matter areas, just a little bit of a different way to organize it. And next slide. So with that, I think I've got maybe 12 minutes for questions. I know I blew through a lot of stuff really fast, but this is a really exciting opportunity, and I would love to talk more about it. I think that yeah, here at IFAI, like what we try to do is put tribal sovereignty and food sovereignty and look at solutions to food security and agriculture that are driven by tribal sovereignty. And this 638 opportunity is absolutely one of those, acknowledging the role of tribal governments in a really robust way in the Farm Bill. Was a really exciting development that came out of the 2018 Farm Bill, and I'm really looking forward to next month's consultation and hopefully USDA opening up that process soon so that tribes can take advantage of this 638 opportunity and start procuring foods for this program and feeding their people just like tribal nations have done time immemorial. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them now. If you need to think about it and formulate some questions or reach out to me later, my email address is here on the screen. I would love to hear from you. In this weird time when we're all working from home, email is usually the best way to get a hold of me, so please shoot me an email. And if we need to set up a phone call or something at a time that works for you, we can definitely do that as well. Happy to do that for sure. So Whitney, Nikki, if there are any questions, let me know.
Yeah,
Carly, anything you want to add?
Yeah, Aaron, we have a couple of questions here. So could you expand a little bit on any requirement for traditional foods to be nutritionally tested to prove that it's of equal or higher nutritional value, as there could be some concern with testing traditional foods to prove its nutritional value?
Yeah, I agree. And I know when that provision came out in the Farm Bill, like that was the one that was most concerning to me. I think we were really excited that this got included in the Farm Bill, but that particular piece we knew, like, especially for traditional foods, like that's going to be a problem. I will say there is no criteria yet as to how you would prove that. So some of the I didn't put this in the slide, but when USDA issued that request for information in December of 2019, some of the responses that tribal leaders and when they responded to that request did discuss this and basically just like encouraged USDA to allow that proof, I guess, proof in air quotes. You can't see me, I'm making a face and saying proof in air quotes, of that nutritional value to be tribally driven, to like let the tribe tell you, USDA, how they've determined it and like what that process should look like. I don't know what USDA will do with that information or what they will decide to do. I mean, it's entirely possible that they could implement some kind of testing requirement for it. I hope that they do not. I hope that they take the very good advice that tribal leaders have given them. I will say this, after several years of sitting in consultation with tribal leaders over 3 to 4 years now, 3 times a year, I think the folks at USDA within FNS who run this program do understand that traditional foods are incredibly important and very closely held, and that I think they're starting to understand that traditional foods are different. So I'm hopeful that they will accept that there doesn't need to be some kind of testing requirement that's USDA driven. I think that hopefully what they will do is allow tribes to self-define, but I can't say that for sure. There will probably have to be some kind of requirement for it. I don't know if we can get some kind of traditional foods exemption. I think that is a really important thing that USDA needs to hear very loudly and very clearly at the consultation in July, just so that they can have that reiterated, that, you know, traditional foods are very special, very closely held, and like don't need to be necessarily lab tested to prove that they're of equal or higher nutritional value to anything else in the process. So I wish I had a better answer to that, but I think you know, the point has definitely been made by tribal leaders and FDIPR program staff, and we'll just sort of see. But I would definitely encourage you, if you're able to join that consultation, to raise that point and let USDA know.
Great, thank you, Erin. So could wild harvested traditional foods be included in FDIPR via 638 if the tribe has an official food code or food safety policy that covers those kinds of foods?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. Like as long as it's domestically produced and it's supplanting and not supplementing a food package item, and it's that's similar or higher nutritional value. Like those are the only 3 things the Farm Bill says. The Farm Bill didn't say anything. It didn't make any differentiation between wild or not. So I think if you've got, you know, that really firm policy foundation behind it, and that's something that you want to procure, then that should be something that's available.
And Erin, this is Carly. I'll interject on that. We actually have wild rice products that were added to the USDA vendor cert list. So we have a little bit of an example about what to go off of, because that wild rice is wild harvested.
That's a really really good point. Yeah, it is wild harvested, and that's something. And I think the salmon's like wild caught as well. So those standards have kind of been baked into those particular food items. So you definitely do have already some good examples of what that would look like. So thank you, Carly.
Thank you so much. And are tribal beef producers able to participate in the FDIPR program?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that if a tribe is applying to this and you want to put tribally produced beef, that can be a food item that you could definitely put in here, for sure.
And just a question about the upcoming consultation on July 15th. Can Native nonprofits sit in and listen on the call, or is it only accessible to tribal leaders and tribal governments?
I think anybody can definitely listen. I haven't seen a registration process come through. I was kind of hoping I would have seen like a link or something that I could send folks so they could register. I think probably what they'll do based on previous phone calls like this is that they'll probably have like tribal leaders be the folks who can speak and everybody else will be on mute. But yeah, I think it's open. It's an open call and you can definitely join and listen.
And I think just a kind of a larger question about how a single tribal member or tribal citizen can be a part of this process and get involved with the 638 and the different program.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's a really good question. Working with your tribal government to just like make sure that they're aware of this opportunity is really good. Helping share the stories of your local agriculture and your local tribal producers also so that that is part of the whole food systems landscape that tribal leaders have to look at as they're looking at applying for this, just making sure that like you're involved in, if there's a community food sovereignty assessment going on, like being a part of that and telling your story, or maybe doing a community food sovereignty assessment for your community if it hasn't been done. Like that's a really great way to have data and stories about your food system that come from the community and are tribally, that's tribal control of tribal data, right? Like so that you have that story to tell and you know which of your producers might be interested in selling to your tribal government food products for this program. So that may be one way to get involved. Carly, I don't know if you have, I don't want to cold call on you, but if you have any more thoughts about that, please jump in here.
Yeah. So that'd be a really good opportunity to reach out to us here at IFAI. The timeline and process, if a tribe is interested in exploring a resolution, really kind of depend on some of the specific criteria as far as what that individual tribe has set up. So we can assist in and consult with regard to what the goals are for the intent of going through the process, and then working under legislative deadlines to satisfy any sort of council requirements, and kind of walk through the process and make sure that you're getting buy-in and that you have all the information that you need and have contemplated moving forward. So that's something that we can assist with, and that's just a quick phone call or email to us, and we will get with you and make sure that you have all the information that you need to move forward.
And Aaron, do you know if there is any potential for there to be funding available for this in the future beyond the $3 million pilot project?
I certainly hope so. I think this is the thing we can, the Indian country can ask for in additional appropriation cycles. So when there's more, when the next appropriation cycle requests start up, like this is a thing that if tribal leaders are talking to members of Congress, that they could identify as a priority. The Farm Bill itself authorized up to $5 million for this, but Congress, if they want to, can go over that. So there were some requests from Indian country that when this last appropriation cycle was going through to go like, you know, to do 7 million for it, or and what was ultimately funded was 3. But yeah, for sure, there will be additional appropriation cycles to look at for this, and then hopefully in the next Farm Bill, the 2023 Farm Bill, I think fingers crossed, we'll be looking for would be an expansion of this to allow for even more participation.
Great, thank you. And just as a reminder to everyone that all attendees, we will be sending out this presentation as a follow-up and a webinar recording. So if you wanted to share that with other members of your team, or need to share this information with tribal leaders, this information will be available. And again, as Erin mentioned, her contact information is here on the web, on the slide here in the presentation, esparker@uark.edu. You can also find all of our team's contact information on our website at indigenousfoodandag.com. And we did have some specific questions, more specifically about timelines and what that looks like individually. So for those of you that ask those questions, I'll connect you directly via email to our team here. But with that, I really appreciate it. Any other closing thoughts, Erin or Carly?
I would just say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I know everybody's on webinars and stuff all the time now, and I really appreciate you taking an hour out of your afternoon to talk about cultivating tribal food sovereignty through this opportunity with us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We would love to hear from you, and we hope that you're also able to attend the consultation on the 15th.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.